Today on the show, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ron Brooks. Ron is the master of connecting people with resources. With over 18 years as a banking executive, a real estate investor, and a one-time owner of the second Black-owned co-working business on the planet, Ron is a wealth of experience and an accomplished entrepreneur to boot. To top it all off, Ron gives back to the wider community with his weekly podcast called Minding Your Own Business Show, where he interviews industry leaders, investors, CEOs, and business owners, all with the goal of sharing best practices and inspiration. G'day, Ron. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today, mate?
Hey, Reed. Thanks so much for having me, man. That's tremendous. And I'm excited to be a part of this show, man. I've been a fan of it, been able to listen to episodes, and I'm excited to be here myself, man. It's awesome.
Well, mate, thank you very much. And I had the pleasure of jumping onto your show during this quarantine time. So I guess before we get into it, how's quarantine going for you? How's it treating you?
You know, what's interesting, Reed, is I've picked up my part-time teacher's aide gig. I've got three daughters here, ages 10, 9, and 7.
Oh, okay.
They're doing full-time virtual school. And so
yes.
In addition to operating my business here at home, I'm like a lot of people around the world and a lot of Americans. I'm also having to be supportive for kind of K through 12 school. And so that's been interesting to say the least, but I'm extremely fortunate, Reed. I've got no complaints, man.
I don't have children. Well. I don't have children. Sorry to interrupt you. I don't have children, but I can only imagine having kids going back to school and having to try and somehow juggle business and the work-life balance and having people, continuing to grow your business, but also have kids not just coming at you. Hey, dad, help me with this.
Yeah. What's interesting is if you want to see some comedy, Reed, I can send you some screenshots of the kids' faces on Zooms. That'll really, if you're ever feeling down, I can send you those. Those are hilarious, to say the least.
I think it's the new norm, right? Where, everyone has to be appreciative of how hard parents work on both the mum and the dad. And, just juggling everything, becoming teachers overnight seems nuts. So man, I definitely don't envy you at all. But let's get into the nuts and bolts of this show. And What I want to talk about today is, and first we'll kick it off with, can you rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid?
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. So, Reed, I grew up here. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, but I grew up here in Memphis, Tennessee, where I'm currently am now. And Reed, what's interesting is, I grew up in, what's argued between Harlem, New York, and here in Memphis, Tennessee, one of the oldest Black communities in the country, that being the Orange Mound area here in Memphis, Tennessee, kind of southeastern part of the city. And so, growing up and facing some of those, challenges and having, very hardworking, engaged parents, I got started in athletics very early. At the age of 4 or 5, I was playing basketball in what's called the Amateur Athletic Union, or the AAU, and I started making my first money was from selling NFL pencils, actually. So I'm playing basketball, but at that time you could get I think there were maybe 28 teams in the NFL, and so you could get all 28 of the pencils, in one pack, and kids, my age and even older, would buy these. And so I'd sell them for $0.25 a piece. So you could get, 4 for $1, of course. And so you could get a whole pack of these NFL pencils for like $2.50 or something like that, and then sell each one, for $0.25. And so, you make a little money. So, for me, having $5 or $10 in my pocket at 6 or 7, that was big money back then. I mean, I could take care of me and a few friends at the ice cream truck, and, from doing that, what I noticed is that, obviously product is, very important, having, something to position and sell and providing a value. And so I learned that early on. My dad was and he is a civil engineer, but he took entrepreneurship in school. And so able to see that, although he was not a full-time entrepreneur himself, he always shared, Reed, that value of understanding what people need and being able to provide it. And then, having some sort of, mission around what you do, so that you don't get caught up just in the sole pursuit of money and financial gain, but you can do some of that while also providing something for people. So those pencils were great because everybody needed them for class, right?
Right. Right.
And everybody wanted to have their favorite team. And Nintendo was big back then, so we were all playing the NFL games there, and that was such a big deal there in my neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, mate, I love that story of selling pencils, being very entrepreneurial at a young age. And actually, your dad and I have something in common. I'm a civil engineer as well. That's what I went to school for. So
Awesome.
very cool. But I want to talk a little bit more about, you mentioned challenges and growing up in the Harlemesque, of Tennessee. For someone who hasn't grown up in that, can you maybe paint a little picture of what were the day-to-day struggles in order to get you to where you are today? Because it's such an accomplishment just in itself. And then we can talk a little bit about how you're giving back to the wider community.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that question, Reed, because oftentimes you see what's going on here in our country, and a lot of people don't always get the perspective because sometimes, again, it's not always everybody's fault, but we're, who we interact with is who we interact with, and we don't always have a direct interaction sometimes with people from various communities. Where I grew up is, and it's like a lot of people that, that may be listening, there's social economic challenges, in that community. This was a community that once did thrive, Reed.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the men in particular worked in factories and things like that, and they created middle-class jobs. And so from those middle-class jobs, then you're able to support local entrepreneurs and local business. And a lot of people then would, start working a job, Reed, and then, maybe branch off and start their own business. Of course, you fast forward and, some things obviously from the, government political standpoint, impacts, those jobs. And
Right.
so then, over the decades, and when I was a little boy, was in the 80s, this is when, this was really kind of coming to a head where these factories would close and these men, it was difficult for them to kind of find new skills or apply their skills in new areas. And so they struggled economically, and that just has a downward domino effect on the community. And so when I was growing up, oftentimes there weren't a lot of men that were, doing things, running businesses and, being heads of households and really driving things. And so, that has an impact. And so for a lot of kids, when you come up in those tough social economic areas and you don't have the mentorship or anybody to look to inspire to, you can aspire to the wrong element, because you look for who's successful. Well, who's doing well in these neighborhoods? Well, it's the drug dealer, it's the, the pimp, and it's those folks. You see them doing well. They're flashy. They're making money. The women love them, or at least from what you see. And so that's then what you can aspire to be. And one of the things that helped me through my career was I went on a field trip to a bank that I actually ended up running later on once it got to my career. But as a boy, I got a chance to see people at a bank that looked like me and that were successful. They weren't sellouts. They weren't trying to act any different kind of way. They were, from neighborhoods like mine and able to see them, be successful. So it's that vision sight, Reed, that I think helped, kids like me be able to then aspire. And I think, a lot of other communities sometimes have, from an early, standpoint in their walk, people have that vision and they can see someone that's being successful. They can see a real estate investor. They can see someone start their own business and be successful and, have a family and things like that. And if that's what they want to do. And so I was fortunate in getting that opportunity, Reed, to see that at a fairly young age, an impressionable age of people, and not just everybody there that looked like me, but, kind of this melting pot of people working together professionally, no matter what walk of life they came from, for a common good. Same just like in sports. I played with, guys that, came from all different walks of life. And many of them were still friends and connected today. And those relationships, help shape, who I am and how I view the world and the level of empathy I'm able to have when things impact people, even if we may not have come from the same area or grew up the same way, whether that's more well-to-do or maybe that's the bottom of the bottom. Having that diversified interaction has really helped shape, who I am. And so I'm very proud of that. And, hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Look, we can unravel this, and I kind of, it's interesting to have those role models in life, and what you mentioned about someone that looks like you, right? And growing up, I'm sure as a black guy growing up, it was rare maybe to see someone in a banking world, like, and this stigma of society that looks at the black community for sporting and music, but in the financial way, and that would have been tough for you. So maybe did that help have a massive impact on you, looking for those inspirations, growing up and not going to the other glitz and glamour that you might have thought was cool back when you were a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things that you learn, in the neighborhood, and again, there's another side of it where I saw, atrocities that were done that are systemic, in neighborhoods, and that's unfortunate. But one of the things that growing up in the neighborhood is when you see those people, a lot of times outside of the neighborhood, the people that you seek success for are athletes and entertainers, and so they aspire to either be, I was playing basketball, played other sports, but you aspire to then be Michael Jordan, and you aspire to be Allen Iverson. You aspire to be other guys that you see on TV, or you aspire to be the rapper, the Jay-Z, the Nas, the Lil Wayne, and those type of folks. And so those become your role models sometimes, and then that's what you aspire to do. And you don't see people do things like in banking, like you mentioned, and I was saying earlier. And so that exposure to be able to see them, and where it can have a cool factor, right? Of course, it's easy to follow along LeBron James, right? You can follow his pathway. You can see the money he makes. It's all public. But you don't know that with the guy that's the banker that's making, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year and comes home and, kind of does his thing. There's not a huge sex appeal to that, right? There's, his salary is not public. There's not a huge salary, because the drug dealer walks by and he's making that per month.
Right.
And so, but he's always looking over his shoulder, of course. And that's a lifestyle that we know what kind of end that can have. And so, having mentors, in playing sports, having, great folks and people around me that kind of, show me a different pathway, and how that pathway can have a cool appeal to it. And I think that's something that kids need today is, the exposure one, but they need to understand that there is a cool factor to being able to, start your own business, kind of own your own narrative, and, be able to drive, commerce, one, for yourself. And then, if there's any way that you'll be able to then give back, that's just tremendous, and a trifecta all the way around.
Yeah, and you to segue into sort of the next part of the show, which is ultimately what you do now is giving back and aspiring other young kids who look like you and want to aspire to be like you. And let's not address the elephant in the room. It's because of the systemic racism in this country and around the world. Let's not get it wrong. Let's not. It's in Australia as well. Trust me. And with the recent events, even myself as a white person have to check myself a little bit. And so, I'm very fortunate to have you on the show to share your story with us, but also how you're going out and helping the wider community, not just the black community, but the wider community to inspire people for change. And that's the grassroots of what I think, in my opinion, will help the systemicness of racism change. And so can you maybe talk to us a little bit about what you are doing today, in and around, I know we spoke a little bit in the green room before about, holding banks accountable to the elderly folk, being an inspiration and a mentor to younger teens who are coming up from maybe low socioeconomic areas. What else? That's just two massive ones in itself. But these things make you tick, right? These things make you, they're very valuable to you. So, and I can see that through just speaking to you and being on your show. So do you want to share with the audience how that has inspired you to be more and do more, and to what your dad said before, it's all about having that mission rather than just looking at the self-worth and the financial freedom you get for yourself and your family, but also giving back to the wider community.
Yeah, absolutely. No, tremendous read, tremendous question. And, my banking career, I'll kind of start there because, I was, actually, 17, 18 years in the banking industry. I started while I was in college. part-time teller, progressed through. And in my last role, I was an executive where I was responsible for 96 employees at
Wow.
this particular bank, which was 2/3 of the employee population, reported to me in the retail area, with 10 branches and a 20-seat call center. And so I was responsible for, a good bit. And so from that retail area, I was always connected with the people. Right. And I always wanted to lead, by that example. And, my team always knew when I came out to a branch, I'm not there as an I got you guy or any of that type of thing, Reed. I'm there to help get obstacles out the way and, to help lead and coach for us to be successful. And I always want to remain connected to the people. I was the guy that even as the VP could walk in and, get behind the teller line and go to and talk to someone in the drive thru. Right. I never saw myself. I never looked at my title as that made me bigger or better than anybody else. It's kind of like a sports team. I have a role on the team, and if my role is to defend or to score or do whatever, then that's what I do. But it doesn't make me bigger than the team or bigger than the next guy who has a different role. But all of it's important to being successful. And so, when that ended, and I'll share with you that. That didn't end on the greatest terms because of my, some of it's because of my entrepreneurial spirit and wanting to see things be successful. And sometimes in leadership, as you know, Reed, everybody doesn't see things that way or see the world that way. Some people see the world just solely as, kind of what's in it for them. And people are just kind of a requisition number sometimes. And that can be unfortunate. And so when you have that difference of view, that can have an impact. And so when you get to what I do today in, going out and compelling these same banks to, as you have branches in these areas, in these various communities, right? And it doesn't mean that, there's a negative light shined on a well-to-do community, right? Because that's tremendous. And obviously you should be doing business there. It's prudent. And if you have target audience there, you should do business. What I hold them accountable to, and most do very well with this, Read, but some need constant coaching and oversight, is to have that equity across where they do business. So everywhere they have branches, you'll have similar services and similar offerings, right, in those areas. And then a big part of that is like you mentioned, the seniors, those matriarchs and patriarchs that help build our communities and help get us to where we are today. Make sure that those folks are protected, and community banks are prime in a really good place to do that, because they know these people, and then they're able to, from a financial standpoint, be good fiduciary partners, and providing resources for them, affordable housing, providing safe havens and safe places for them. I mean, even during this COVID, where seniors are heavily impacted, apparently by the virus, that to make sure that they're safe and they're able to interact with families, and they're protected from financial exploitation, which is really big, Reed. Just last year, according to the CDC, if you go to cdc.gov, you'll find this stat, 2.9 billion was lost last year to elder financial exploitation in this country. I mean, you're talking almost $3 billion. And when that happens, you paint the picture for the impact of that. Someone that's worked their whole life building their community, right? Whether they've owned a business or they've worked a job, they've raised family, just to get to their latter years and have that scammed from them in some type of way. And they're not young like you and I. They're not able to just go back out and, relaunch their business or sell more product or find more talent, right? And so, that has a devastating impact on those lives and then on our communities. And so I saw an opportunity to be able to give back in that way, with my relationships with, those community banks. And again, it's a compelling of, don't forget, about these folks over here, and let's make sure that they have resources, as well. And the benefit the bank receives by doing that, is tremendous. And like I say, most of them Read, they do see the value in that. Sometimes it just takes, and we talked a little bit about this earlier. You made a great point, is, that understanding the empathy and having someone like me that looks like me, but has been in their chair. So there's a credibility. be able to speak from the empathetic standpoint, because a lot of those bankers don't live in those communities and they don't have families in those communities. And so it's when you don't have that connection, it's harder to feel that empathy. And that's why the videos with the unfortunate incidents that have taken place in Minnesota and Wisconsin and other areas, that's why the camera phone has been so valuable, because it allows people to see, say a George Floyd, and know that, a George Floyd could be in anybody's family. And, there's a human element to that. So you don't have to be black. You don't, you can see the human element of, that's just not right. Right. And so the same thing in with what I do with banks and compelling them to work in those communities is, for all of us to be able to say, that's not right. Even from here, I haven't spent much time in Australia, but if that video popped up in Australia, right, and the person didn't look at me, I should be able to look at that video and say, that's not right.
Right.
Because, there's a human element that comes first.
100%. And it's so true. The human element. It's not a political thing. It's a human element. A fellow brother and sister has been hurt, and that's what we need to all care about. And I think what you're doing on the grassroots there and helping the elderly people in communities, the low socioeconomic communities, is so important, because you have that empathy with them, right? My question to you is, how hard has it been to persuade banks, these banks that have their systems in place, and maybe even nationwide or statewide, and, seem like a very slow moving, set in their ways, probably have a very whiteboard, how do you get them to understand and bring that empathy to the fore? Because I feel like that's so hard when we're in this world of very polarized political stratosphere, that anything you trying to get someone to see the other side, that they may not have never ever experienced, is like nearly like shoveling, excuse my language, shit uphill. You know what I mean? Like rolling a boulder up a hill. It must be crucial, excruciatingly tough. So how do you go about handling and showing them that the sort of the benefits that this bank could potentially benefit from by offering the same services as an affluent neighborhood?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's tremendous. And what's interesting about that, when you ask that question, Reed, is a lot of the neighborhoods that I work in, it isn't always a situation where it's separated by race. In some instances, it's more just the social, economics piece of it. So, I work a lot in the Midwestern part of the United States, and there are a lot of those counties, Reed, where they're pretty much all, it's pretty homogenous in terms of race. But what you'll see is you'll have more well-to-do census tract and then a less well-to-do census tract, and they all may look alike, right? But there's just that difference in the social economics, and so even in those instances, to answer your question, I sit down with the bank's leadership, and banks are required to fulfill a regulation that was enacted in 1977. By the Jimmy Carter administration, which is Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA. And so that prevents them from redlining, which is a tactic that they used to do on a map to determine, okay, we're going to give terms here that are different than over there, or we won't lend over here at all. And so it prevented that and made that illegal for them to do that. And so they're required and they're examined for that every few years to make sure that they're doing that. And so as a component of that, they're already kind of being charged for it. I think the big thing that they lack that I provide, Reed, is like I'm sharing with you, it's the connection to the story, right? So I'm not coming in as the bully saying you got to go and do this for Black people. That's not really my approach, or you've got to go do this for poor people, for seniors. It's to bring it to their awareness. So specifically, it's, recording a story with a senior who's been impacted, right? A family member who maybe also be a customer of theirs. So some of their big customers, a big, say a big real estate investor whose mom is in a senior facility, right? He or she would appreciate that bank's support of, hey, my mom lives in that home, and I don't want her to, find out her checking account's been emptied, or, have her abused at the home by a caregiver, or the iPad that mom or dad uses to communicate with grandchildren and great grandchildren, and even for me, disappears and is stolen. And so it's sharing those stories again to drive that empathy, and then and connect that to the value and the benefit back to the bank. So it's addressing the what's in it for me, which, like you said, I mean, that always can end up being the elephant in the room. It's, oh yeah, that sounds great, Ron, but again, what's in it for us? Why should we care, or why should we do that? And so it's tying that back to the value, and I leverage a lot of my experience, there, Reed, as a business owner and as a former banker, and I say, well, here's the benefit. A lot of these homes, those folks, even if they're not high on the economic scale, they tend to have nest eggs, and they tend to look for banking services. And what better than to have your bank go in and showcase as a good faith that you're supporting this senior, facility, and want to see crime reduced, or instances of abuse, or and then definitely the financial exploitation. The second piece, so that's kind of the opportunity business development piece of it, Reed. The other piece is the compliance piece and the risk management that comes from it. Because guess who holds the bag when the senior comes to the bank and says, my money's gone, right? They're doing an affidavit with the bank, and the bank's giving them the money back. And then they have to go after the person who did it. Well, the person who did it may be in Nigeria, right? So good luck getting them to extradite, a person and do all that type of thing. And so oftentimes you end up in a situation where you're, I guess, holding the bag. So it's an economic loss for the bank. And so when you look at, how much loss they take from fraud, it behooves them then, Reed, to really be active. So it just takes someone like me, who's kind of coming from a slightly different community, but knows their language and knows what makes them tick, and being able to just share with them that empathetic piece of it, to understand how they can make that investment, and then making that then as the investment piece as streamlined as possible.
Yeah, and I think it boils down to that fair and reasonable, right? What's fair and reasonable in life? What do you expect? Is this a fair and reasonable ask, that this community does not have a certain banking system because it's a lower socioeconomic community, not by any fault of its own. And so understanding the empathy of it, I think it's super important. I want to pivot a little bit into the affordable housing piece, because I know that's another big arrow or tool in your tool belt that you're a massive proponent of. So do you want to walk me through what you're doing? There's the banking side of it, but then what are you doing from the urban development side for the low cost housing to help the low socioeconomic communities, be bolstered up with some affordable housing as things, get more and more expensive and wages aren't growing, but the cost of living seems to always keep increasing at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. No, tremendous there, Reed. With affordable housing is interesting in that a lot of these communities, and you hit the nail on the head with pricing. And so, from the developer contractor standpoint, they're always balancing the cost of labor, the cost of materials, and that kind of from your business. Those costs are always, they rarely go down, but they certainly can go up.
They never go down.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the geopolitical piece of it. There's the taxation and, some things like that, that make it difficult to build or rebuild in certain areas. You've got gentrification. Oftentimes that can be a detriment to an area. While it can help areas in some instances, oftentimes it ends up in the relocation of the current population. So then it becomes, criminal, in my opinion. But from the affordable housing standpoint, it's also compelling these lenders and banks to and invest in these areas in kind of rebuilding and restructuring housing. And so there's number of community-based groups that I connect with, and then something that I do from the real estate standpoint is kind of teach people one. How to prepare to be an owner, right? That's so important because there's a certain mindset that you have to have to get people to understand that even in your community, you have the option to purchase your housing, and it's not as limited as, well, you've got to have this great credit and you've got to have all this cash sitting around. And a lot of people, that's what they believe. They believe that, so they have more of a defeatist attitude towards it because they say, well, Ron, I don't have $50,000 sitting around and I don't have, an 820 credit score. And so I'm sharing with them that you don't have to in none of those. There's ways that you can own either through terms. There's ways you can get involved in wholesaling and things like that to help people and then help get to a point of ownership, for yourself. And so, again, going into these neighborhoods, connecting with the banks and then connecting with the people. So specifically, working with a bank and their retail marketing team, making phone calls and even visiting those people in the neighborhood. And a lot of times you find that you build the credibility just by spending time. You go there, you spend time, you go to the community center, you might play a little basketball with some of the kids and then you sit down and have a conversation.
Right.
And then some of those community leaders, you sit down and you say, how can we, get you connected to the resources? And I found to read that oftentimes people who have resource, they want to do things. There's just no one there to connect the dots, right? So they often shy away because they get beat up a lot. They get pounded. You should be doing this. You're not doing that, and it's, people are always quick to, beat you up or join the Twitter mob and, try to counsel everybody and that sort of thing. And so going to them from a standpoint of, let's connect, right? Let's network and give you a chance to see it. And as you see it and experience it, your mind will connect to, how you can help and that sort of thing. So it's not you running to people with your hands out and saying, oh, give me, give me, give me. So, getting people to understand that, these folks are not looking at handouts, kind of contrary to the, popular belief sometimes. They don't want a handout. They just want to be treated fairly, like you said earlier, fair and equitable, and, give them a chance, right? And giving them a chance, they may not have the most polished record or the most polished speech, but most of them will work hard and they want to be able to do for themselves.
Right.
And so it's once you connect them, connect the parties together and let them experience each other, because that's been a big thing, for myself, Reed, is because I've had this diverse exposure and upbringing and understanding how people on different sides of the tracks think. And there's a lot of misconceptions on either side, right? If I go back to my old neighborhood, they think everybody that's got money cheated somebody and, was able to get over or had a silver spoon in their mouth, and all this type of thing. And then when I go to the other side of the tracks, they think that everybody over here is lazy and, all they want to do is live off the government. And what happens is when they get together, they find out, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, there's a human element involved. And there's three things that we all want, no matter what we look like in the mirror. We all want to do a little better for ourselves, a little better for our families, and a little better for our communities. So all of us have that common goal. Now, how we get there is, we all have our different ways to Sunday on how we get there, but we all generally deep down, that's what we want. And then we want to be able to obviously enjoy life and that sort of thing, and give back. And so that's been the big ways, and it's not easy, right? It's not easy to get people to see outside their bubble, right?
Yes.
And so what you have to do is bring it close to them, and think of those situations like we talked about. George Floyd, that could be in anybody's family. Anybody could have a brother or a cousin or a dad or an uncle, a really good friend that can happen to. And there's been, those were high profile, but, Reed, there's been tons of things that have taken place all around. And so it's connecting people to that so they can see the empathy and see that human side.
Wow. Well, a lot there to unpack, and I do want to be respectful of your time. But one of the things that came up to me was, and the analogy of like a cooking pot, like a recipe, and part of the recipe is adding some flour and adding an egg and adding different elements. And these are all, whether that be through banks, might be the egg, but also what I heard you there is financial education at the grassroots level. and showing people that they've got this preconceived notion of home ownership, and there's many ways that you can get to that goal without thinking you need to have a 820 score and $50,000 sitting around. How important is, or maybe not how important, what elements are involved in that recipe? Because obviously that you need to have buy-in from the bank, you need to have the local community and the urban development, the city involved with wanting to improve neighborhoods that are in the low socioeconomic and maybe have been neglected in the past, and trying to change that viewpoint of the lower side of the tracks, so XYZ, which is really tough in itself with deep-seated, both racial but also upbringing type of mindset. But then there's also the financial education piece and tying those all together, that recipe together in order to bake the cake is really where you come in, right? Like you're sort of the glue to keep it all together. So I guess is there any one element that's more important than the other, or all needs to come together on the table to make sure that we are making this cake correctly and everyone's going to benefit from it?
Yeah, that's a beautiful, analogy that you give, Reed. And yet I would answer that to say that, just like a cake, every ingredient is important, right? Because when you have your cake as a whole, notice you don't see all the ingredients once you have the whole cake, because you see the outside of it. But anybody that's baked anything knows that there was butter that went into that. There were eggs, there was flour, there's icing across the top. And what makes that analogy really beautiful is the diversity of all of that. Think about it. Every ingredient in that cake came from somewhere else for the most part. It was produced somewhere. The eggs might have came from Kansas. The sugar and the icing might have came from Florida. But it all comes together for this one cake that's on your table, right? And so every component of that then becomes important, because also someone who eats cake a lot, of course you can't see my stomach, those that are listening, someone who loves cake.
Sweet tooth, mate.
Yeah, exactly. That that if some of those ingredients are missing, that impacts either the integrity of the cake, its ability to form. It impacts the taste, the smell. If you ever had a cake, without sugar, that can be impacted, right?
Right.
Without using eggs and flour, it's not going to bake up and fluff up without using the yeast and all everything that goes into it. And so, I equate that analogy to within the community is that, there's no kind of one ingredient. It's incumbent upon us all to be able to come together and work. And so it requires the financial education. It requires, kind of things at the government level to set kind of the playing field. All of us as citizens within a community to help connect and support. And so, at the very beginning of that is mindset. And mindset gets shaped by, that exposure, like we talked about earlier. When you can see it and you can see it work, that takes away that pessimism and that cynicism sometimes that people have in communities, because they've been, sometimes led astray and that sort of thing. And, they've been scammed. And so they have that pessimism and cynicism. And so they haven't seen it work. And so then they don't trust it. And so what you have to do is you have to build that trust up by letting them see that. So at the very beginning, they need to see people own their home, right? And so what you have to do is expose them to that you can do that. You don't, like you say, have to have all those things in place. Let's help you get those things in place. But in the meantime, let's challenge the critical thinking and the mindset. And then when you go to the banks and you say, yes, we know you have to have risk management. We know you're not in the business of just giving out money to every single person, right? They're required by law to be prudent with the money that they've been entrusted as a steward to manage. And so we get that. They're also in the risk business. And sometimes you have to remind some banks that they're in the risk business. That's what banking is. You're in the risk business. You put money in the air. You're taking a credit risk and you're looking to get paid back with interest on that risk. And every single person that walks through the door is some level of credit risk, right? Because we're human beings, right? We're the biggest wild cards in the world. And so, because a human being can change, it's not like a rock, right? A rock's a rock, right? If you sit it down, it won't move till you move it. Human beings are completely different, right? We have a thought at 1:00 and a different thought at 1:01. um, and so it's bringing all those things together, and that's why I love that analogy that you gave, Reed, because all those ingredients, like I spoke about, the education, the health, that's another piece of it. That's a huge impact. The ability to feel good about yourselves. I mean, this. When you have a business that's doing well, you feel good about yourself. If you've got a job, that you love and is doing well, and that sort of thing, you feel good about yourself. You have an identity, and sometimes in these communities, people don't have that identity, and so they go create it, right? And sometimes they create it unscrupulously, and then that creates a lot of major issues that oftentimes we see. And so, having that cake and the ingredients come together. And I think that's what you're seeing around the country is this awakening to, we saw it in 08, 09, and we talked about my podcast with you was, in 08, 09, this awakening of entrepreneurship that, all right, boys and girls, you can't put all your eggs in one basket and that sort of thing. And you kind of need to diversify. And, why are we okay having multiple debts, but not multiple incomes, that sort of thing. And so that began challenging the thinking in this country. And now I think what's happening, Reed, is that critical thinking is getting challenged from a social justice standpoint, and the benefit of equity. And I think companies that embrace that and banks that embrace that are going to do very well in this next evolution of what life is once this pandemic subsides. I think the people that are willing to truly embrace that and see that human element and see that cake and know that you don't bake a cake by just eggs, right? Or just sugar, right? Won't make a cake. And so I think as leaders see that and they transition and they get more comfortable with it and more exposed to it, and have it in their circle. A lot of times, we're so segmented in this society. I've got my friends, you've got your friends, and these are the only people I ever interact with. And so, once you get a chance to kind of step outside of that and see these people, and you're like, you know what, it's not so bad, or it's not like what I read or what someone told me, right? Or my preconceived notion about it. And again, that's on either side, right? Because both sides of the tracks have that,
right?
And it can impede that ability to come together for those ingredients to bake a good and tasty cake.
Well, mate, I want to be respectful of your time, but one question I have for you right at the end here is we've got a lot of investors who listen to this show, a lot of people who are very who are into, let's just say, financial freedom for themselves right now. But what can we all do as real estate investors and business investors to make an impact on the greater community? What's one thing what's a piece of advice you can give to all of us?
Yeah, I think the big thing is to be able to have empathy through engagement, through listening. Many that are in real estate, and you become a landlord, and that can be a tremendous thing. Sometimes being a landlord can have a negative connotation. But it's tremendous around this country. It's one of the things that makes this country great is the ability to own real estate, be a landlord, and provide housing for someone else. But I think the one thing that real estate investors can do is have that empathy and be willing to listen. And I love what you said, in interview on my podcast about, how you work with tenants and even as the pandemic was coming along and anticipating where there might be gaps or concern, and then the relationship that you have with the tenant with, the ability to have that two-way communication. I think is tremendous. So I think that, that's the number one thing that I think real estate investors, particularly those that are, you're buying and you're holding and you're, you have tenants and that sort of thing, is that, kind of listening and that connection. And then, kind of along that, the other side of it is if you're more of a buy and flip, type guy or girl, look at who you're selling to and being mindful that, going into a neighborhood and adding Starbucks and, adding, these corporations and things like that can look good. They can have they can convert real estate into beautiful structures and things like that. But, oftentimes what can happen is you can contribute to the gentrification to where the current resident population can no longer afford to live there, and they end up forced to move, or getting pushed out, or that sort of thing. And so, I'd hope that real estate investors would be mindful of that. And that goes back to that empathy piece of, going in, when you go into neighborhoods and you look at the spreads and things like that, that's all tremendous. But don't forget about the people that are there. And is it such that, find creative ways to be able to restructure and improve a community, but not move the current residents who love that community and have supported that community. Don't price them out or kind of, create a situation where economically they can't remain in their home. Mm-hmm. And so I challenge, all of us, in that capacity that's in real estate. If we can do that, those kind of one thing combined, Reed, I think that, it'll be, again, it creates this trifecta of wins, right? Real estate investors win, the community wins, and then, overarching, our country wins. When we're able to do that. And I think, as like we talked about before on either side, I think when real estate investors see that and see that as being something that's beneficial, certainly economically, but just overall to their business, and you can lay your head on your pillow and feel good about what you're doing, I think that's going to speak volumes for us.
Yeah, 100%, mate. I think at the end of the day, we're all in the business. We're in the people business, right? Whether we're real estate investors, we're providing housing, whatever spectrum of the housing sector you're on, we're providing shelter, right? And one thing the pandemic has at least taught me is that without my tenants, I don't have a business, right? And so making sure that we are not the big bad landlord, we're not that sort of stuff. We're there to support them and see them and hear them in the fact that they might have lost their job but it's not no fault of their own, right? And we want to work with them. But I also understanding how the investment decisions you make today will impact a community in years to come. And so being empathetic towards that, and I think that's what it's been the real crux of this show, has been showing empathy towards one another, regardless what side of the tracks you're on, because we are all humans at the end of the day. And that's, it's not a political sport. We're just trying to do what's fair and reasonable for everyone involved, not just for your own back pocket. So yeah, love it. All right, mate. Look, we're going to get into the final lightning round. It's called the top 5 investing tips. You ready to get into it?
Yep, let's do it,
mate. What's the number one habit you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
The top thing for me, Reed, is to write down. With all the technology that we have today, I try to make sure that I write things down. Every morning, I write down just real quick, and it sounds kind of cheesy, that sort of thing, but I write down just a couple things real quick that I'm really either proud of or that I'm grateful for, right? And then what do I need to accomplish at the end of the day, right? So whether it's recording this podcast with you, whether it's, recording on my own podcast, whether it's having a conversation with a bank, what do I do that moves the needle? Can I talk to one person, in the community or one banker and, maybe share with them a video of here's what's going on right here in your backyard that you may not see. Right. And so, and then you think of that personally, with my girls and, with my wife and with family, what do I need to accomplish? What do I need to be available for? That sort of thing. So I like to write it down because it helps that commitment piece of it. I find when I'm typing stuff, just copy and pasting stuff, it doesn't have the same effect on me. I can still get it done, but there's nothing like, just, taking a pencil or a pen and just writing it down and putting a couple notes beside it. What am I doing and what's the impact?
Yep.
Right.
No,
and who's benefited from it besides just myself?
And you're so right. I'm right now. I'm writing down for the people who can't see it because it's obviously audio. But if you jump on the YouTube channel, you'll see it. I've got a book. I'm old school as well. I have a number of these in a box, and I write my to-do list down every day. And to your point, the gratitude list. But there's also an element of that physical writing on the paper that sort of is then embedded in your brain subconsciously that you're going to go off and do that, whatever that task may be, whatever you're grateful for that day. And over time, as you do it again and again, at least in my experience, it becomes second nature, right? It becomes ingrained in you. And then the other thing I love about writing down is, particularly on to-do lists, get to cross it out, right? And that act of crossing it out is like, it's a little victory. Yeah. I did
it. And something else real quick to add to that, Reed, is something that I've done before in the past, and I probably should do more of it now, is I would, and again, this sounds cheesy, but I would write myself a quick note and mail it to myself.
Wow.
And
okay.
So what would happen is, say like on a Monday, if there's something I need to do, I'd write great job, Ron. You were able to get that done, woohoo, or something like that, or something funny quote or something I saw. And then, again, I stick a stamp on it. If I happen to be out, I drop it in one of those, USPS, mailbox slot things or whatever. And I address it to myself. Right. And so then, by Wednesday or Thursday or whatever, it's coming in the mail. And so now I get that, and it's like, okay, it's from me. Okay. And it's a big thing about, like we teach in the community, it's got to start with you, right? You've got to want it for yourself, and you've got to be able to encourage yourself. And that's one thing that helps me is just that. And we don't get a ton of mail like that anymore, right? Everything is, like we talked about, is electronic. So you're just getting that note in the mail, and it's coming from me, and it's just an encouragement. So that Wednesday, I may be struggling with something, or maybe I'm not feeling as upbeat or something like that. And now I get this from myself, that's saying, hey, keep going, keep pressing, man.
I love it.
You're on the right track. So it's kind of you talking to you, but, so it seems kind of weird. Someone listening to this may be like, God, that's weird. But
who's that creepy guy mailing me stuff?
Right. Yeah, exactly. This is Ron guy. But yeah, man, it definitely helps.
That's awesome. No, I think that's a great little piece of advice. I've never even thought about that, but it's yes, the mail is always something. You got to address something. You got to do something with mail, and it sort of can be a little bit overwhelming. But I definitely love that. Question number 2: who is the most influential person in your career?
God, that's a tremendous question. I've had so many. I'll tell you, not even from banking. I had a high school basketball coach, Reed, and I'll try to make this as brief as possible. He, when I came in as a freshman, I was, a little bitty kid. I was fast. Okay. I could move around. I could run fast. I had, athletic ability. Something he told me early on that really stuck with me. And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about when he said this. It sounded dumb to me, but he said, Ron, you got to learn to be quick and not just fast. Like, what the hell's the difference? But you fast forward through just my basketball career, I learned that, what I was bad about doing was I could take the ball and run, but I get in trouble, right? If I get there and the other guy's 7 feet tall, right? And so I go flying down the court, but I turn the ball over, I throw it away, or I go and miss a shot because I'm trying to shoot it over some big tall guy, right? Versus what I learned was to be able to come down and allow my teammates to fill in and be able to survey and assess what's going on. Where is everybody? Do I have, one of my teammates who's got a good shot? Is one of my teammates in a better position? And then if not, be able to run our offense. And so I took that from sports, from basketball, and applied it to in business, right? Instead of just being fast, right? So fast means, from my standpoint is, I can jump on a plane or in the car and run to a bank unannounced and, hey, I want to talk to your CEO about investing in this, right? That would be fast, right? And someone may meet with me, right? And say, all right, come on. But being quick is being able to survey. It's being able to, like you do in real estate, to be able to assess, a property and assess its status and assess, where the opportunities are around it. And then be able to strike quick, right? So quick means I can come down and I'm under control, right? And if I see an opening to the basket, I go, right? If not, I pull it back, right? And something else. And so the same thing in business, I encourage listeners is, you'll see your opportunity sometimes to strike, just go, right? The lane's open, wide open for you to go and get a shot at the basket. If not, take a step back because you have teammates, other people that you're connected with, that are trailing or coming in that may have a good shot or may have an opening. And so that was a big piece of advice that I learned early on that helped me, right? So I didn't go chasing every opportunity just because, again, it's the shiny object,
Right.
right? That shiny object syndrome of chasing every idea, every business, kind of running around without any kind of real focus.
Love it. I think that's a very, very valuable piece of advice. Being quick, not fast, and assessing and surveying the issues as they come up rather than just reacting all the time, which we sometimes as humans can tend to do. Love it. Question number 3 is, in your business, what's the most influential tool? And when I say tool, it could be a physical tool like a journal or a phone, or a piece of software like a digital tool. So what's the most influential tool you use in your business on a daily basis?
Yeah. You know what? Right now, it's the podcast. To be honest with you, when I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, but when I got into the podcast, I wasn't smart enough to make the dot connection read of how my voice would be amplified to reach people. Right. So I had been in banking for say my time in banking all those years. But I'm finding now that those bankers are knowing me from my podcast, right? That I've been doing, for a much shorter period of time. And certainly, I always thought, at least for them, may not have the same sex appeal as Ron, the former VP of retail, right? Versus Ron, the podcaster. But, I'll go to a bank conference. And this is, a complete true story. I went to one in Michigan and the guy recognized me from my podcast graphic. And he said, are you this guy? And he had it on his phone. He was listening to an episode.
That's awesome.
This guy's CFO of the bank. This guy's making awesome. $400,000 a year, right? Running this big bank. And he's walking through the conference. He's got headphones on and he stops me. He's like, man, this looks a lot like you. Is this you? And like, yeah, that's me, man. He's like, oh man, that's awesome, man. I listen to, Did
you give an autograph?
That's tremendous. But what it did was it opened up a lane for us to have a warm conversation about this bank and what they're doing, like say in the community read. And so it's become a powerful tool over time. But like you mentioned, there's other tools that I use, Salesforce and like say my journal and calendar and that type of thing. Those are all obviously influential in their own rights. But the podcast has allowed me to also it kind of serve as a digital resume, so to speak. So they get to know me prior to even meeting me by listening to episodes and hearing conversations I have with people. And so that's tremendous.
And building that credibility instantly, which is really, really good. Yeah. So absolutely. Love it. Question number 4 is, in one sentence, what has been the biggest failure in your career? What did you learn from that failure?
Biggest failure. I'd have to think about that. Not that I don't have any failures, as far as my biggest one.
Almost influential.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it too. When I became the executive, it was at my last place. It was not being too ambitious about my career progression. And so that's how I'd say that in one sense. I was really aggressive towards my career ambition, and that cost me, I think, down the line because I lost that focus, and that focus started to become singular.
So you learn not to be hyper focused on one thing and one pillar in your life, and you let other pillars in your life fall away. Is that what you hear?
Well, I Reed, I was 35, at that time, and I had been on this career progression, and I felt that I was going to be, eventually on that career path to that next step. You got to keep in mind that at that institution, I was the second Black executive ever in their now I guess about 65-year history. And so I was excited about that, and started to have my I don't want to say delusions of grandeur, but my head got into the clouds about how I could progress to that next step. And the next step would have been CEO, right? But by doing that and losing sight of the moments, from moment to moment, I think that was a huge failure, but that I learned from and that I carry now into what I do.
That's awesome. Beautiful. Lovely. Last question, mate, for the show, and you can talk a little bit about your podcast, is where can people reach you to continue the conversation? They want to be in your sphere. Where do they go?
They can connect with me on social media I'm at champ Ron, or actually at champ underscore Ron underscore. So at champ underscore Ron underscore. That's on most of the social media. You can connect with me there. I'd love for you to email me, Ron at themybpodcast.com. I'd love to connect there. And as you mentioned, the Minding Your Business podcast, where we kind of blend that fusion of business and lifestyle into one. You can always check me out there wherever you find your podcast. And so love to be able to connect with you there and continue dialogue.
Awesome, mate. Well, look, I want to thank you so much for jumping on the show today. I just want to reflect some of the things that I took away for today. I firstly want to thank you for being so vulnerable around some topics that need to be talked about right now and need to be aired. And with your experience in the world of trying to be more empathetic and trying to be that glue in the cake to bring the pieces together is really influential. And because of your upbringing and probably some of the challenges that we spoke about earlier through that upbringing that you see folks in low socioeconomic areas struggle with, but knowing that there's solutions to all those problems, right? And as long as people are willing to come to the table and have a little bit of empathy and doing what we talked about, which is fair and reasonable. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from today's show. Did I leave anything out?
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head. I think that's tremendous. And again, Reed, I appreciate this opportunity. It's excellent to be able to speak with you on this tremendous platform that I've been following. And this is just awesome. I love it.
No, wait, thank you so much for jumping on the show. We will enjoy the rest of your week and we'll catch up very, very soon.
Yep, sounds good, Reed. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, there you have another cracking episode, jam-packed with some incredible advice from Ron. And he is just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to everything related to trying to build that empathy from the lower side of the tracks and trying to bring people together to the table and to try and propel the community forward. And I think that is such an influential thing that we need today in today's society. And as all real estate investors, we need to understand and wake up a little bit about what we're doing and how we are impacting the community, how we can all be better. Because it is our responsibility as investors to do what's right and do what's fair and reasonable, which is what this real theme of the show has been today. Well, I want to thank you all for jumping on this show today, taking some time out of your day to continue to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about here on this show. And we're going to do it all again next week. So remember, be bold, be brave, and go give life a crack.